11 months after George Floyd's death, 10 miles from the trial of Derek Chauvin in his killing, and there's another deadly shooting of a young black man. Is it deja vu? No, actually, it's much worse. I'll tell you why. It's Rob Nelson Live. All right. Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to the Monday night Rob Nelson Live. Tonight is a kind of a serious episode. Thank you for being part of the show. As always, we're streaming from our studios in Los Angeles and Florida. We're in Los Angeles right now. And to you on whatever social platform you're on, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, we appreciate it. Love your feedback. Love your engagement. I'm a little somber today. Unless you have your head in the sand, you've probably heard what happened yesterday afternoon. 10 miles from the trial of Derek Chauvin for the death. I'm going to call it the murder, but it is a murder trial of George Floyd in Minneapolis, kneeling on his neck for 9 minutes. There's another officer-involved shooting that kills another young black man. And riots erupt and protests erupt. And before you jump to conclusions, because this one, unfortunately, has an odd twist in it, let's just look at what happened. Daunte Wright, 20 years old, driving a car. I think we have a pic of him. Crafty, do we have a pic of Daunte? Just want to put a human face here because you won't see it in the videos. That's him with his little kid's face blurred out. Daunte Wright, 20 years old, driving with his girlfriend, is pulled over in what appears to be sort of a pretext traffic stop where they find a reason to pull you over, something's wrong, and they discover that there's outstanding warrants for his arrest. I want to show you a short clip of the video of what happened, because I think if you haven't seen it, it's worth watching to see how this unfolded. Take a look.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So the audio is a little hard to hear, but it's worth noting what really went on there, right? So they pull him out of the car, and it's a black officer that's taking him out of the car, and he asks why he's being pulled out of the car, and they say there's warrants for your arrest. He appears like he's about to handcuff him. He stops in the middle, lets go, and the kid jumps back into the car. At which point you hear the other officer, she's saying, I'm going to tase him. I'm going to tase him. I'm going to tase him, as if sort of telling the other officer to get out of the way so she can tase him. At which point she pulls the trigger. And I don't care what you think, like, you know, whatever biases you bring into it, it's pretty clear this cop did not realize what she'd done until she did it. And she goes, oh, shit, I shot him. And the other cop looks at her and he's like, what? Now, he then the car drives off and crashes and he dies. I am not justifying the shooting. And I'll get into this whole thing because I think it's really significant. What I'm pointing out is this is a clear case of something gone terribly wrong and a young black man dying who, again, maybe warrants for his arrest, but it's irrelevant. Like, you know, and before you jump to the conclusion of, well, he jumped in the car, he shouldn't have driven off, I'm going to address all of that. I just want to start with the fact that they pull him over, failure to fully handcuff him. He jumps back in the car, meaning to tase him. She instead shoots him. Riots erupt, protests erupt. It's literally, guys, it's 11 months. And you can't make this up. It's 11 months from George Floyd. The trial of George Floyd is happening 10 miles away. This is a suburb of Minneapolis. If ever there was a place, you've had massive police reform. If ever there was a place, ever, where you would say this shouldn't happen, couldn't happen, wouldn't happen, the police wouldn't let it happen, it just happened. And if you want to jump to the conclusion, see, all cops are racist, you can go there. Or if you want to jump to the conclusion of, see, he should have just complied with the police, this never would have happened. Analysis paralysis. How about the black active duty military lieutenant of Virginia in his army fatigues who was pulled over by two officers? Craziness. Absolutely. And before this show is over, I'm going to get into sort of where this all started in this chain of events over the last few years of these shootings. But I want to focus on this for a second, because what we just saw is like a redo of what happened a year ago, and protests erupting all over again. And the mom, Katie Wright, Dante's mom, says this to the cameras.
And he was only 20 years old, and he didn't deserve to be shot and killed like this. And I don't want all of this. I just want my baby home. That's all I want, is I want him to be home. I don't want everybody out here chanting and screaming and yelling. I just want him home. That's it.
I cried earlier today watching all of this. It chokes me up right now. I mean, I don't care what your politics are. That's a mom who just lost her kid. She's not praying to the camera. She's literally like, I don't even want all this. I don't want to be protesting. I don't want to be screaming. I want my little boy back. I mean, I lost two brothers. I know what a parent, guys, watching my mother, I know what a parent goes through losing a kid. To lose your kid in a tragic shooting like this, you know, whatever he done, he wasn't on the run from the cops. He wasn't speeding away. He wasn't pointing a weapon at him. Did he jump back in his car? Yes. And he's shot and dead today because of it. And his uncle, the uncle of Dante's little boy, held his little boy up. I want to show you a picture of this, holding him up to show it's the uncle holding him up to show the police line. And people on Twitter reacted, some saying, don't show this to the little boy. He doesn't need to see this. I don't know. I mean, I get it. It's going, look at this. This is what ended your dad's life. But and I'm outraged and I'm upset and I'm sickened. But here's where I go with this. Guys, think about it. If 1 year of BLM exploding across the nation, literally in every single city and town, erupting in massive protests, riots, a massive social awareness shift, a massive nationwide anti-racism campaign, coverage in the media day after day, every major sports league, every major corporation, Hollywood, everyone jumping on the stop racism, pay attention to it, police brutality against Black people, major reforms across the board in police departments nationwide, movements to defund the police, create community policing nationwide, massive changes, massive reforms, massive awareness for a year straight. You literally could not create more focus, more attention, more pinpointed laser focus on this, deal with it. And yet 11 months, 10 miles away from the trial of George Floyd in the suburb of Minneapolis, a police officer shoots another Black man. How could you even do it? If you think about it, how could you even think, like, your career is over, your life is probably over, you're going to go to prison forever. You know, I don't care how much you might argue somebody hates Black people. You wouldn't do it. It's stupid. It's suicidal. How could it possibly happen? How could the awareness have not been strong enough? How could all we've done not made a difference? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we're focusing on the wrong thing. I'm not saying there isn't systemic police, brutality. I'm not toward lower income people in general, toward Black people. I'm not saying there's not systemic bias. I'm not saying there's not systemic racism. I'm not saying there's not structural racism. There's all those things. Why? Because they're born with it. No, I don't agree. And I'm going to tell you why. It's something much worse than systemic racism or structural racism. Think about it for a second. It's something so deep, so triggering that on both sides of this equation, you have this kind of reaction happen. The police chief said the officer thought she pulled her taser. You clearly see her saying, I'm going to tase him. I'm going to tase him. Yeah, thank you, analysis paralysis. Right, it's the Twin City area. It's 15 minutes from Minneapolis. But that's my point. If ever there was a place this wouldn't happen after all that's gone on, it would be here. There's no logic for it except for what I'm going to say. She thought she pulled a taser. She clearly thinks she's pointing a taser. It's apparent. She's saying, I'm going to tase him, like, get out of the way. She pulls the trigger once and goes, oh, shit, I shot him, like in disbelief. And they look at her like, what? How do you accidentally pull your taser instead of your gun? Your gun is holstered in most police departments on your primary side of your body. If you're right-handed, your gun is on your right side, your taser's on your left side. They both look it has a handle like a gun and a taser, but they're very different. One has a sensor light that comes on. They look different, they feel different, they're different weights, and one is on a different side of your body. How do you accidentally pull the taser out? Monkey arms, maybe we need to start holding cops. Well, I've got a solution for what I think we need to do with cops. Listen, monkey arms, I'm going to go there with this in a minute on what police are doing. But I want you to first take a minute with me and just for a second, put your bias and prejudice down. This woman was not out to shoot a black man. There's a black police officer who's taking him out of the car. Legitimately, they have a right to do that. There's warrants for his arrest. They clearly are at one point going to handcuff him. Then they hesitate. He jumps back in the car. She says, I'm going to tase him, which would be the appropriate response. She accidentally shoots him. The police chief says she accidentally shot him. You can go, how do you accidentally shoot someone? And I'm going to give you a reason. Because you are in a crisis mode, well beyond your training, well beyond what you're prepared for. You are terrified every time you are pulling over a black man because of what's happened. You are on your extra special don't F this up. And what do? You F it up beyond belief because you're not trained. The average cop is not trained to be able to do this. They're not special forces. They're not military vets for the most part. They are under enormous pressure, and under that pressure, she cracked, and an innocent of this, I don't care about his other stuff, an innocent young man dies. It's tragic. It's unforgivable. It's not acceptable. Dante Wright should be alive today. There's no question about it. I'm just saying she didn't want to go out and kill a black person because she doesn't like black people. Okay, Reddit, the only reason cops act like Rambo hotshots is because they know nothing will happen to them because of legal immunity. Yes and no. I agree with you, and there has been an enormous, but some cities are now starting to remove qualified immunity that protects police officers from being charged. But my point to you on that is this clearly isn't that case. That cop's not acting like Rambo. She's clearly yelling, I'm going to tase him, I'm going to tase him. And she screws up and shoots him. Not an okay screw up. But my point is, if you want people to be perfect, you're in the wrong business. Our cops are not only far from perfect, they're screwing up all the time. Not every single cop, but this just keeps on happening. I have a belief in what I think this really is. It's what my old friend Jody Armour, the diversity professor at USC, a leading scholar in Black Lives Matter and Black racial justice issues, calls unconscious bias. It's the bias built into people's heads that in every sociological study they do, they find people when tested will see a black person having a gun more than a white person, even if the white person has the gun in the sociological psych test. You know, why people cross the street when they see a black person, why well-intentioned liberals hinge the other way, why every black person I know who's a guy who's tall says, I see it in people's eyes, I see it in their behavior, I see their body language. It's an unconscious bias drilled into your head that is a level of fear and uncertainty that makes you react irrationally. And if you are the one with a gun, at the other person's expense. Do you remember Philando Castile 4 years ago when he was pulled over driving? He was pulled over and the officer comes to the car and he announces to the officer that he has a firearm in the car. I want to play Apprehensive is back with how Grover Cleveland would have handled this. You know what, Apprehensive Fly 11, I can't laugh at that today because I'm so disturbed by what just happened, and not just because of this young man, but because of what it says about where we're going, what's going to keep happening to us. I want you to take a little video, if you have a minute to watch part of the video of Philando Castile if you haven't seen it, because this starts out as a routine traffic stop for bad headlight, what they call a pretext stop. Something's wrong in your car, they pull you over. Whether we should have pretext stops or not, I don't know. I've been pulled over on pretext stops my whole life. But, you know, they find something wrong, pull you over. It's a reason to temporarily arrest you, detain you. It starts civil. The cop is not out to start a fight, and Philando Castile is clearly not trying to resist. Look what happens. This is one of the most shocking videos in this thing I've ever seen.
The reason I pulled you over, your brake lights are out. So you only have one active brake light, and that's going to be your passenger side one. Your third brake light, which is up here on top, and on this one back here, is going to be out. You have your license and insurance?
Sir, I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me.
Don't reach for it then. Don't pull it out.
I'm not pulling it out.
Don't pull it out.
You just killed my boy. That wasn't me. He wasn't me.
Don't pull it out!
He wasn't.
Don't move!
Man, I can't.
I mean, that is unconscious racial bias if there ever was one. The guy's literally pointing, leaning into the car saying, you know, do you have your civil conversation? You know, you pulled you over for the lights. Do you have a driver's license, insurance? Philando Castile says, I do. You know, hands him his driver's license. Where is his insurance and registration? In the glove compartment. So before he opens the glove compartment, he says, I need to let you know I have a weapon in the glove compartment. That's what you're supposed to do. Announce to the police that you have a weapon, a firearm, so that they don't suddenly see it when you open the glove compartment. At which point the police officer's like, don't take it out. And you can hear him in the background saying, well, I have to take it out. In other words, I have to remove it to get to the thing. He's clearly not violent. He's clearly not agitated. He's clearly calm. At which point the officer loses his shit completely, pulls his gun in and goes ballistic. It's horrifying. Just pumping bullets into him. That is not a rational behavior. That is not something that is going to ultimately be like, oh, I wanted to do this today. That's like a fear that's so deep, so twisted, so grounded. No amount of protest, no amount of anti-racism rhetoric, no amount of signs BLM on NBA games is going to change that drilled in thing in so many white people's heads that sees fear in black people, especially in certain communities. It's not going to go away. I don't care how much you want to pray on the altar of BLM protests. Not going to, and I'm not picking on the protests. It's just not going to change this. If it was going to change it, this wouldn't have happened yesterday. This wouldn't have happened in Minneapolis during the George Floyd trial. If you were going to be able to change that unconscious bias drilled into people's heads that makes them behave and see something differently when it's a black man, you're not going to change it. It's simply not. I don't know how over the long term. That's why I'm depressed. I don't know how in the long term we're actually going to change that because it's in so many people's minds. Some black people even talk about having it. I talk to black cops who talk about having it. And look, to the point of cops not being held accountable, I just want to say this all started with Eric Garner in 2014. Remember, Eric Garner was selling the loose cigarettes, and the cop held it in a chokehold, and he said, I can't breathe. That was the original I can't breathe. That cop didn't pay a penalty at all. There were actually no charges filed for his death. Michael Brown, Ferguson, 2014, the cigar store thing, right? It led to no charges. Well, he was acquitted, but to awareness that Ferguson had systematic racial profiling going on and clearly had a systemic bias toward black people. Then there was the Laquan McDonald, who did have a knife, and a lot of cops would say, you know, if you have a knife, we're going to shoot you. Black cops might say that too. Tamir Rice was the 12-year-old kid who's holding a toy gun, and the caller said, there's a kid in the park, he's got a gun, I think it's a toy gun. The cop shot him. No indictment. And finally, you know, Philando Castile, which you just saw, that cop was acquitted on all counts, 2016. We have come a long way with George Floyd in that for the first time, we are starting to see cops will be held accountable and will pay a price, qualified immunity or not. They will pay a consequence. You know, Derek Chauvin is going to be convicted. He is not going to get acquitted. None of those other people did. Has the movement led to change and accountability? Yes. But has it led to stopping this from happening? No. And it won't lead to stopping it from happening. Two things aren't going to happen, guys. And I don't care which side of yeah, you're right, monkey arms. Yes. And those were horrific scenarios. But that part has changed. You are going to see more accountability in courtrooms, but you're not going to see these things stop happening. If this could happen yesterday in Minneapolis, it's going to keep happening. Trust me, because it's not about just systemic profiling. It's not about structural racism. It's not about cops who hate black people, which I think Derek Chauvin did. This was not a black hating cop. There was a black cop involved in the situation. This was a cop who didn't have the wherewithal to keep her cool and made a deadly mistake that cost a young man his life. Right. And my point is, if you, whatever side of the spectrum you're on, if you're on the side of, look, cops just need to stop doing what they're doing. We need to hold them accountable. Good luck with that. We may hold them accountable. It's clear they're going to keep doing what they're doing, not because they want to. Nobody wants to do what this woman cop did yesterday. She's going to probably go to prison for it, for manslaughter, because there's no justifiable reason for saying I accidentally pulled the gun instead of the taser. Like, okay, that may be negligent homicide, but it's still homicide. But if you also go on the conservative side and argue, well, this problem would just be solved if young black men stopped running from the cops, ain't going to happen. We have built a culture in which young black men are afraid of police officers, and it is not for no reason. I've heard more people say to me, well, just do what they say. Well, there's a reason they don't. I mean, this kid, what was he thinking? You could ask him, what were you thinking? Jumping back in your car? You were going to get shot. The mother even said, I just wanted him to come home. I can't tell you the number of mothers I've talked to, mothers who've lost kids, black mothers who've said, and in black communities who've said, I just tell my kids, we tell them, don't run. Just don't resist. It's not worth it. Just get home safe. But they still run. Why? Because they distrust it. I had lunch a couple weeks ago in Jacksonville with a black police officer on the force who said his entire life growing up in the hood, he was bullied by the cops like all his friends were. It's like they just were on our backs all the time. I became a cop to try to change that. So when you are afraid of the cops, you are going to act irrationally, even though if you're talking to Dante Wright, you're going, dude, don't jump back in the car. It's not worth it. You might get shot and killed. It's a high probability. He still jumps in the car. Not going to change. Don't expect that to change anytime soon, but don't expect the other side to change either. Don't expect cops to get over that unconscious bias that makes them overreact when it's a black young man in a car, because you can train them all you want. And again, maybe if you're training special forces team to be cops, maybe if you're training military vets, but the average cop's not going to handle that well. And some will succeed and others will fail. When they fail, it's going to be an innocent person who's going to die. So what's the solution? Seriously, what's the solution? I'll tell you what I think the solution is. And it's not one I would have thought I would have bought into before yesterday. We need to take guns away from most cops. We literally need to take lethal weapons away from most police officers. If you want this to stop, it's not going to stop any other way. It's just not. So now you argue no one will be a cop. Maybe. Then cops can be cops who are willing to not care. And I'm not saying no law enforcement can have lethal weapons, but only highly trained special units that are trained and have enormous self-control to be allowed to have a deadly weapon. Honestly, I think it's the only way. And some countries have managed to succeed without having police officers armed. People argue we're in a very violent society. Those cops will get shot all the time. What happens if they need a gun? My answer is, you're going to have to make a trade-off. How many more people do you want to get shot by cops in scenarios like this? And by the way, the reaction isn't, we're going to have a whole new round of protests, people blowing up. We already do the rioting, the looting, which is useless and a waste of time. And even at this point, the protests don't change. And we just had a year of protest and it didn't clearly change this. The accountability side is changing. That's good in terms of what will happen after the fact, but the actual problem not going away. So one solution's to take weapons away from most police officers. Reddit, Stu Pidasso, all police officers need better training of escalation of force like the military. I would agree with you, but here's my point. They clearly have been trying to improve training, and Minneapolis the last year spent a lot of time on trying to do that. So my point is, I don't know if you escalation of force, that police officer was not acting in a way that was beyond the proper escalation of force to want to tase him, jumping back in a vehicle. Now, you might argue they should just let him drive off, but tasing would be appropriate. She reacted yelling, "I'm going to tase him," and instead was holding a gun and shot him. So she wasn't mentally able to deal with the stress in that it's a crisis scenario. So are you sure even training would solve that problem? Unless you want a whole different caliber of police officers. So I'm going to argue the police officers who are allowed to have weapons that are deadly have to be not only trained, but have to be a certain caliber that's above the notch of the average police officer. Everybody else, you don't get a deadly weapon. But here's the other thing. Think about this for 1 second. How in a nation, in 9 months, we came up with a vaccine to stop a pandemic? We are sending little rovers to Mars. Elon Musk is busy mastering artificial intelligence, and we're busy loading payloads into space that can start shipping us all around. We have mastered more technological feats in the last 20, 30 years than anyone in human history could ever imagine, and more in the last 20 years than have been done hundreds of years before. And yet, to this day, no one has been able to come up with a viable alternative to a deadly force weapon like a gun. A taser's not a viable alternative. Tasers don't always work. They don't always stop people. You can tase someone 4 or 5 times. Sometimes they'll keep going. I mean, how hard could it be? Could we just simply say we're going to spend $2 billion if that's what it takes, and we're going to develop a weapon that neutralizes a human being but doesn't kill them? Not a taser that literally neutralizes you. Can't we do that? We literally have solved so many scientific, technological problems. Do we just not have the will to go, let's find a true non-deadly force weapon? I don't buy it. I do not buy that this country could not come up with a weapon that could do that, that's not deadly, and it's not a taser. And yet, there's been nothing. People say there's research going on. Well, maybe we need to spend $3 billion in research then, because it's going to cost us way more than that. The BLM alone cost way more than that. So maybe we just need to wonder, how is it that this supercharged, high-powered brain trust of a country can't figure that out? And maybe, if President Biden on the left and if gun activists on the right spent a little less time fighting about whether having guns or not having guns was the problem and came up with a solution that was a non-violent weapon that literally froze someone in their tracks, that might be a useful, effort for both sides to make. That said, we have got a gun violence problem in this country. Not going to deny it. Just 14 hours after this shooting, there's another school shooting in Tennessee. Got a little graphic of it. It happens in Knoxville, a school shooting. Can we see the tweet real quick, Crafty? This from the Knoxville PD. Multiple agencies on the scene of a shooting at Austin East Magnet High. Multiple gunshot victims reported, including a school resource officer. Investigation remains active at this time. Please avoid the area. That was less than 15 hours after what happened in Minnesota. Another school shooting. And if you know, Knoxville had 4 teenagers in the last month in shootings involved around that area and school related, but not on the school. So we've got a gun violence epidemic off the charts. It's every week. It's either a police shooting or it's a mass shooting or it's a group shooting. And sadly, the majority of the victims of gun violence are black and brown. Whether it's violence from black on black violence or whether it's white on black violence, I don't care. They're the majority of the victims. We've got a gun violence epidemic in this country that is horrific. It's right up there with COVID in many respects, if you want to be honest, in terms of the sheer pain, suffering. That mom, I just want my baby back. Maybe we as a country literally need to stop being so stuck in the divide we're in. Get rid of guns, don't get rid of guns, because that ain't actually going to happen in any time, in short period of time, and start looking at some alternative solutions. I'm going to stick with it. 1, we need to de-arm police officers who do not have the adequate level of training and pass a mark that ensures they will be able to handle being in these high stress situations. 2, we need to bring the rhetoric down. Making cops terrified of every black person they see in a car, which partly we've done by making everything about racism, isn't helping it. We need to start creating trust. We need to start having cops literally do their training in inner city and impoverished communities where they're going to be policing. They need to be a requirement of being a cop that you spend time in those communities before you actually make it out of cop school. And we need to look at why we haven't come up with some real alternatives to a gun. And that's just the surface. That's just the surface of this problem. But at a minimum, think about it. 11 months, 10 miles from George Floyd's trial. This happens again. If that's the case, everything that's happened in the last year has been a failure and a waste of time. So let's start figuring out how to actually turn that around and make this problem change it, change the future for the next generation. Because again, I'm going to wrap up on this. Telling kids not to run from cops doesn't seem to work. And telling cops not to flip out and lose their mind when they see a black man in a car or on the street coming at them isn't going to work either. So right now, we're at a checkmate and everybody's losing. All of us as a society. We need to open our minds, come up with some different viable solutions, and realize that raising the rhetoric, again, more protest isn't going to change a thing. It might make you feel good, but if the last year didn't do it, another year of protest won't either. We're all suffering from this problem, and it's a sad day. It's Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.